They tried to steal my lake. First it was a smile. Then came forged documents, corrupt officials, and an attempted boat heist. What they didn't know? I don't bluff, and I don't lose what's mine. This is the war I fought to take back Keller Lake. And I didn't just win, I buried them. They say when you've got something good going, the world starts spinning just a bit faster to try and knock it loose. Maybe that's why I was already halfway through my second coffee the morning everything started. Not because something felt wrong, but because everything felt exactly right. My name's John Keller. I own a piece of land in northern Michigan that most folks only ever dream of. I'm talking about a full, privately owned lake, Keller Lake, named after my grandfather who bought it back when land was measured in stories, not in square feet. Over the years, I built it into something more than just property. It's a working lakeside retreat complete with rental cabins, a private beach, a sturdy dock, picnic pavilions, fishing spots, and a boat slip big enough to dock a 40-footer. I live on the southern side where the lake curls like a horseshoe around the tree line. My house overlooks the water, far enough from town to keep the noise out, close enough that I can hit the hardware store before noon and be back grilling by 3. The lake has always been mine, every inch of shoreline documented and titled. That's not ego talking, that's paperwork, deeds, surveys. I keep copies in a fireproof box and digitals on a drive, and I've needed them more than once. Now on the north side of the lake sits a neatly tucked subdivision, Spruce Hollow Estates. Rows of beige homes, 2-car garages, white mailboxes that all look like they were factory issued. HOA country. I'd never had a problem with them though. Years back, when Peter McDougal was their HOA president, we struck a gentleman's deal. Their little lakeside wellness club, kayaking classes, paddleboard yoga, kids' swim lessons could operate from a small slice of shoreline, rent-free. No paperwork, just mutual respect. They didn't litter, didn't bring rowdy parties, and Peter always made a point to call before any seasonal events. I respected the man. After Peter moved to Arizona, I heard they'd elected a new president, Karen Lawson. I didn't think anything of it. If anything, I expected more potlucks and flyers. For the first few months, she was polite, maybe even overly so. She'd stop by occasionally with fresh squeezed lemonade and a clipboard, chatting about future improvements to the lakeside area. Extra benches, maybe a small floating dock for the kids. I didn't say yes, didn't say no, just told her I'd think about it. Hell, I figured she was just trying to prove herself in a new role. Then she started showing up unannounced. Once I caught her walking around my boathouse with one of her club volunteers, pointing at things with that same damn clipboard. She acted surprised when I showed up, like I'd interrupted her in her own kitchen. "Oh, John," she said with that permanent grin some people wear like armor. "Just admiring the layout. So efficient," I told her calmly, to give me a heads up next time. She nodded, smiled wider, and then showed up again the next week without so much as a knock. Still, I let it go. Old habits die hard, and I guess I still had Peter's handshake in the back of my mind. Then spring rolled around and I bought myself something special. A brand new 30-foot cruiser. Fiberglass hull, twin engines, teak interior. The kind of boat that made early mornings worth the cold and summer afternoons feel like heaven. I docked her proudly at my pier, on my property. 2 days later, Karen showed up. No lemonade this time. "That boat," she started without even saying good morning, "is much too large to be moored here." I blinked at her. "Here? You mean my pier?" She folded her arms. "John, it obstructs the view from the community area. It could be a safety hazard for the children during kayaking hours. It's excessive," I laughed. Not a polite chuckle either, a full, dry-throated laugh. You're telling me my boat on my dock on my lake is a safety hazard because it's excessive? She didn't flinch. We'll need to reassess access. The HOA has guidelines about maritime structures. You're not the Coast Guard, Karen. It's a matter of aesthetics and safety, she replied, jaw tightening. I told her firmly that unless she had a badge or a warrant, she had no authority over my dock, my boat, or my damn shoreline. She left with that same painted-on smile, but I could see the wheels spinning behind her eyes. That night, I pulled out my deed again, reread every line. Keller Lake, full perimeter, dock rights, water access, and all surrounding land down to the north fence line. Mine. I even emailed my attorney just to be safe. He replied before midnight, "Everything's in order, ignore her." I should have felt reassured, but I knew better. When people like Karen start smiling too much, something ugly always comes next. I woke up to the sound of engines I didn't recognize, not the lazy rumble of a fishing skiff or the quiet purr of a jet ski. No, this was deeper, mechanical, professional. I knew the tone well enough. I used to work marina maintenance back in my 20s. This was a boat hauler, a goddamn tow rig. I grabbed my jacket and headed down the path toward the dock. There it was, a massive hydraulic trailer backed up on the service road beside my boat slip, with two men in neon vests undoing winch straps and prepping lines like they were minutes away from lifting a beached whale. My cruiser, my brand new 30-footer, sat calmly in the water, gleaming in the morning sun like she had no idea she was about to be kidnapped. "Hey!" I shouted, voice already sharp. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The taller of the two turned with that oh-so-practiced expression of mild surprise. "Good morning, sir. We've been contracted to relocate this vessel. HOA order. You can take it up with your local association." I stared at him for a beat, blinked once, then twice. "This vessel is docked on private property. My property. There is no association that has any authority here." He gave a small shrug and produced a clipboard with a stamped document. "We have a directive signed by the HOA president, Ma'am Karen Lawson. Says here this boat is in violation of community safety regulations and must be removed immediately." I snatched the page from his hand. It looked official if you weren't used to spotting fakes. There was a watermark, some heavy legalese, and a signature I recognized from her earlier courtesy notes. But what stood out to me wasn't just the tone, it was the language. The document claimed temporary administrative jurisdiction over Keller Lake dock zones. I let out a sharp laugh. There is no such thing as jurisdiction over Keller Lake dock zones. This whole lake is private property. That document is forged. You two are about 3 minutes away from being on the receiving end of a trespassing charge, unless you want to test how fast the sheriff drives. The shorter guy, nervous type, glanced at his partner. "I told you this wasn't right," he muttered. "Pack it up," I said, stepping forward between them and my boat. "You touch that hull, you answer for it." They hesitated. Then the taller one raised his palms and started backing toward the truck. "We're just contractors, man. No need to get heated." "I'm as calm as the lake," I said. Though my fists were clenched hard enough, my knuckles cracked. They left begrudgingly, tires crunching gravel in reverse. But I wasn't relieved. Because not 10 minutes later, Karen showed up. She didn't even bother with her usual fake pleasantries this time. Just marched right up to the chain gate at the edge of the dock, her ridiculous wide-brimmed visor nearly knocking against the post. "You had no right to interfere with an official action," she said, voice sharp enough to saw wood. "You tried to steal my boat, Karen." "I was enforcing community safety. That boat is a liability. What if a child runs into it during kayaking? What if it leaks fuel into the lake? Then maybe you should keep your club's kids on your side of the lake." This lake is part of the shared environmental corridor. I don't expect you to understand the legal framework. No. You expect me to roll over while you try to fabricate authority over something you don't own. She crossed her arms. We'll see what the city has to say. I already talked to my attorney. You're bluffing and your little directive is worthless. Next time you send people to touch my property, I won't just threaten trespassing, I'll press charges. Her face didn't flinch, but I saw the way her left eye twitched. The smile she slapped on next was pure venom. Fine, we'll do it the formal way. And just like that, she turned on her heel and walked away. That evening, I made sure every camera on my property was functional. Double-checked the locks on the boathouse and cabin storage. Something told me this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the kind of person who accepted no. She was the kind who doubled down when she lost a hand. I figured I'd seen the worst of it. I was wrong. 2 days after the attempted boat heist, I locked the main dock gate and hung a sign on the chain. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Below it, in red, Keller Lake access revoked for Spruce Hollow HOA. It felt final, like I'd just slammed the door on a polite but persistent intruder. For over a year, their little lakeside club had used my shoreline for yoga mats, kayak launches, paddleboarding, Zen retreats, and summer swim camps for bored suburban kids. I'd let it all happen without asking a dime because I figured people should have a place to breathe. But now that courtesy was over. The club was done. That same afternoon, I drafted an official cease and desist letter with my attorney citing unauthorized use of private land, attempted property interference, and misrepresentation of legal jurisdiction. We emailed it to the HOA, addressed directly to President Karen Lawson, and followed up with certified mail. Legally sound, bulletproof. I also pulled my staff off any duties related to the club's access. No more trash pickup near the community side, no bathroom access, no lifeguards stationed at the North Cove. If they wanted to use the lake, they'd need a court order, and even then they'd need a damn good reason. I replaced the casual no-entry signs with heavy-duty aluminum ones, bolted into cedar posts. Cameras were repositioned. New locks were installed on all lake access gates. The picnic area was cleared out. I even disconnected the club's outdoor charging ports and removed the kayak racks they'd mounted, without permission, by the way, onto the west tree line. The backlash came fast. First, the HOA board tried calling me, multiple times. I didn't answer. They left voicemails like, "John, this seems like an overreaction. Let's not punish the whole community for a simple misunderstanding. You're making things difficult for our kids." Then came the emails from angry parents, some civil, others not so much. One read, "You're traumatizing children because you don't like Karen. Grow up." Another asked if I plan to drain the lake next. Someone even accused me of eco-terrorism for removing the yoga pavilions. By the end of the week, the HOA had launched a full-blown smear campaign on their neighborhood Facebook page. I wasn't a member, but screenshots made their way to me, courtesy of an old friend who lived in Spruce Hollow. One post showed a dramatic drone photo of my boat dock with the caption, "Monopoly on nature? Keller Lake stolen from community." Another was a selfie of Karen with a sad-looking Labrador retriever standing at the locked gate with the tag, "Local kids heartbroken by sudden closure of beloved lake." Beloved? They hadn't even maintained their side of the shoreline. My crew used to pick up beer cans and snack wrappers after their eco-mindfulness meetups. Then came the flyers. Dozens of them, stuffed into mailboxes, tacked to street poles, even slid under the windshield wiper of my truck when I went into town for groceries. They all had the same header. Keller Lake is a community resource. Fight for access. Below that, wild claims that I had no legal right to hoard natural space, that I'd threatened teenagers with a firearm, absolutely false, and that my boat was contaminating the water and disrupting wildlife migration. Wildlife migration, on a lake that freezes 6 months out of the year. It would have been funny if it didn't feel so damn targeted. Then late one night I found a cinder block sitting in front of the gate. On it was written, in red spray paint, "You don't own nature." I reviewed my security footage. 3 silhouettes, hooded, no license plates on the truck they arrived in. One tried to climb the fence, slipped, and fell back into the brush. I sent the footage to the sheriff's office. They promised to look into it, which in rural Michigan usually means good luck. That same week, one of my dock workers, Daniel, a college kid I hired for the summer, was followed on his way home by an SUV. It peeled off before he could get a plate number, but the message was clear. Pressure was building. I sent a second letter to the HOA, this time with a clear warning. Any further attempts to access my land will be treated as criminal trespassing. Any defamatory statements will result in litigation. The next morning, Karen posted a video of herself standing at the edge of the lake, arms folded. We believe in inclusion, in environmental fairness. One man cannot dictate access to nature because of his wealth or status. The HOA is exploring formal channels. Stay tuned. Oh, I was tuned. I was tuned all the way in. The envelope arrived on a Monday. Heavy cardstock, crisp seal, hand-delivered by a man in a gray suit who didn't look like he smiled much. He didn't say a word, just handed it over like he was delivering a wedding invitation from Satan himself, and walked back to his black SUV without a glance. Inside, a civil complaint from Spruce Hollow HOA. They were suing me. The language was dense and overreaching. The HOA was seeking injunctive relief to restore community access to Keller Lake, citing historically established usage rights, community wellness dependency, and, this one made me laugh out loud, the defendant's negligent stewardship of an environmentally shared body of water. They were accusing me of neglect. Me, the man who personally stocked that lake with smallmouth bass, who paid for annual ecological assessments, who spent the better part of his weekends cleaning trash from the shoreline left by their damn teenagers. The filing even included what they claimed was a signed agreement from the previous HOA president that granted semi-permanent easement rights to the lakeside area. Only one problem. That agreement was fake. I would know because I never signed one, and Peter McDougal, the real president before Karen, would never have slipped something like that past me. We'd run things on handshakes and respect, never on forged legalese and HOA letterhead. I scanned the signature block, a scribbled P, McDougal, typed above a mismatched notary stamp that wasn't even from our county. Karen was trying to backdate history. It was sloppier than I expected, but dangerous all the same. I forwarded the document to my attorney, Leslie Garrison, a bulldog in a pantsuit if there ever was one. She called me an hour later, already fuming. "This is not just a nuisance suit," she said. "They're trying to establish legal precedent for shared control of your land. If this goes through, John, you could lose control of the lake entirely." "Then we go nuclear," I said. "Oh, I already filed for sanctions," she replied. "They don't know who they're messing with." The problem, though, wasn't just the court. It was the city. Leslie filed counterclaims within days: trespassing, defamation, attempted interference with private property. Standard stuff. Normally, the municipal system would process those motions alongside the HOA suit. But suddenly we hit delays. And I mean delays. Documents went missing. Hearings were postponed. Email chains couldn't be located. A clerk claimed our filings had been misrouted. Leslie, not one for tinfoil hats, started making calls. She didn't like what she found. Someone's sandbagging us, she said, and not just anyone. This smells like an inside favor. A little digging turned up a name. Paul Stanwyck, Deputy Director of Municipal Property Affairs. A low-profile paper pusher with too much discretionary power and not enough oversight. Paul had a long-standing consulting relationship with Spruce Hollow HOA. Leslie even uncovered photos of him and Karen at last year's Spruce Hollow Summer Gala, standing arm in arm in front of a giant banner that said, "Proud to serve our HOA family." When Leslie filed an inquiry with his department, we got no response. Then she filed a Freedom of Information Act request. That finally got us a few redacted email logs, just enough to show he'd personally intervened in several pending cases involving HOA land disputes. "This guy's dirty," Leslie said. "He's sitting on your filings to give them time to build a media narrative." And build it they did. Karen started making the rounds on local talk radio. She gave interviews to suburban lifestyle blogs. There was even a piece in the city newsletter titled, "HOA President Fights to Reclaim Public Access for the People." They framed me as some cranky hermit who'd barricaded a natural treasure behind steel gates and surveillance cameras. Photos of kids crying outside my locked fence made the rounds on social media. Never mind that half of those kids were actors in staged shots. Then came the protest. I heard them before I saw them. A dozen people, or maybe 24, hard to tell through the megaphones and paper signs, gathered outside my front gate. Chants of "Share the Lake" and "Down with Greed" echoed across my pine-lined driveway. Someone threw eggs at my mailbox. Another tried to jam the gate lock with chewing gum. A woman in yoga pants with a "Justice for Keller Kids" sign screamed at one of my employees as he tried to drive out in his pickup. The whole thing stunk of orchestration. It wasn't organic. It was a campaign. And I was the target. That night I sat on the porch with a cold beer and a .45 caliber just in case someone got brave. But mostly I thought about Peter. If he was out there, he'd know the truth. He'd know Karen was playing dirty. And he'd be the one person who could prove it. It was Leslie who found him. Peter McDougal, the ghost of HOA presidents past. Turned out he'd moved out west but hadn't disappeared entirely. He was living in Flagstaff, Arizona, running a small hiking tour company. Apparently, retirement didn't sit still for him. Leslie tracked him down, gave him the briefest outline of what was happening, and within 2 days he was calling me directly. "John," he said, voice as dry and gravelly as the land he now called home. "I heard Karen's been busy rewriting history." "You could say that," I said. "She forged your name on a fake access agreement and tried to use it to sue me for the lake." Peter exhaled long and low, the sound of a man who'd seen too much HOA politics and thought he'd left it behind. "That's not just unethical, that's criminal." I flew him in the next week. He walked straight into Leslie's office, shook her hand like a contractor signing off on demolition, and sat down to draft a sworn affidavit. He didn't stop there. He brought an external hard drive, years of board meeting minutes, email threads, personal notes, and scans of every official document from his time in charge. One of those documents was particularly important. A board resolution from 2 years ago confirming that the HOA had no formal agreements or legal easements with me or my property. It was time-stamped, signed, unambiguous. "I tried to keep things simple," Peter said. "Karen always wanted to formalize access, write it into HOA policy, but I told her we didn't own that right. She hated that answer. Guess she decided to rewrite it." Leslie smiled like a cat who just saw the canary choke. "This changes everything." The next day we filed Peter's affidavit and submitted the resolution as evidence. Within hours, the court issued an order for Karen to appear at a preliminary hearing to address potential document fraud. That's when the cracks in her empire started to show. Karen showed up to court wearing a power suit 3 sizes too confident. She sat stiffly, flanked by 2 HOA board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. When Leslie presented Peter's affidavit and the original resolution, the courtroom went quiet. Karen tried to object, claiming the documents were outdated and unverified. But the judge wasn't buying it. "Mr. McDougal is here in person under oath. Unless you have evidence to the contrary, I'm accepting this as valid record." That's when Leslie dropped the bomb. "Your Honor," she said, "we've also submitted communication logs between Ms. Lawson and Deputy Director Paul Stanwyck of Municipal Affairs. These include correspondence suggesting efforts to suppress counterclaims and obstruct administrative processing of this case. We believe this constitutes public corruption." Karen's lawyer went pale. Karen herself turned toward Leslie with a smile that was all teeth. "That's a gross mischaracterization." "Then explain this email," Leslie said, sliding a printout forward. It was a message from Karen to Stanwyck. "Appreciate your help slowing things down. The longer we delay, the more public support we build. I'll make sure the HOA remembers you at budget season." The judge blinked twice. "Is this real?" "It came through a FOIA request," Leslie said. "Chain verified, metadata intact." Silence. Karen shifted in her seat. Her left foot started tapping. Then Peter, calm as a man sitting in his own living room, leaned forward and said, "Your Honor, if I may, I've been watching this play out from afar. I may not be involved anymore, but I'll tell you this. What Ms. Lawson is doing doesn't represent that community. It doesn't represent anyone. This isn't about access. It's about control." The judge nodded. "Noted. We'll be reviewing all evidence. This court is now in recess until formal hearings begin." As Karen walked out of the courtroom, reporters swarmed. She tried to ignore them, but one caught her eye with a loud, clear question. "Ms. Lawson, did you fabricate legal documents and attempt to seize private property?" Her face twitched. Then she snapped, "This is a political hit job. I've done nothing wrong." The footage aired that night. Meanwhile, Peter and I had a quiet drink back at my place. He looked out at the lake and shook his head. "Same water," he said. "But damn, it got a whole lot murkier." By the time the trial began, Karen Lawson was no longer smiling. She walked into the courthouse in a dark blazer, no makeup, no entourage. Just her and a high-powered defense attorney who looked like he'd rather be at a yacht club brunch. Gone was the Instagram-ready neighborhood queen. In her place stood someone who finally realized she was no longer in charge. The courtroom was full. Local news reporters, HOA members, parents, even a few off-duty cops. I recognized at least a dozen faces from the so-called protests that had been clogging up my driveway a few weeks ago. Now they sat in silence, waiting to see which way the gavel would fall. Leslie took the lead for us. No fluff, no courtroom dramatics. Just the facts, one brutal document at a time. She walked the court through the forged access agreement, handwriting analysis, mismatched notary seals, forged timestamps. She brought in the digital metadata from the Word doc Karen had created. Turns out the 2019 agreement was created 6 months ago on a HOA office computer under a username labeled K. Lawson Admin. Then came the emails between Karen and Paul Stanwyck. Not just the one we had shown earlier. There were dozens more. Messages openly coordinating delays in processing court documents, selectively denying FOIA requests, even discussing how to neutralize Peter McDougal's testimony by discrediting him as mentally unfit. Peter, of course, testified in full clarity and composure. The judge had no doubts about his credibility. When he read the part about Karen trying to brand him unstable, Peter just chuckled and said, "Well, I've been called worse, but never by someone so desperate." The final nail came when Leslie introduced a recorded voicemail. It was left on my office line the night before Karen tried to tow my boat, Karen's voice unmistakable. You can either play nice or you'll find yourself locked out of your own water. The board listens to me now. You're just one man. I have a community behind me. The courtroom went silent. The judge leaned forward, his expression like stone. Ms. Lawson, are you aware that attempting to seize private property through document forgery and abuse of public officials is a felony offense? Her attorney objected. The objection was overruled. Karen looked pale. Her hands were shaking. She didn't speak. For the first time since this whole mess began, she seemed truly small. And then the verdict came down. The court found Karen Lawson guilty of document falsification, fraudulent misrepresentation, and interference with legal process. The judge ordered her immediate arrest pending sentencing. A deputy approached her. She didn't resist. No tears, no last words. Just a stiff walk out of the courtroom in handcuffs while the flash of cameras lit up the hallway. But that wasn't all. The court ruled that on Keller Lake and all adjacent shoreline structures remain under my exclusive private ownership, protected by deed and legal precedent. The HOA was ordered to pay me $250,000 in damages, including legal costs, reputational harm, and expenses incurred during the forced shutdown of my operations. An additional $80,000 was levied directly against the HOA board for enabling defamation and participating in coordinated harassment. And Paul Stanwyck, he was placed under internal investigation, suspended without pay. Within 2 weeks, he quietly resigned from his post. The HOA fell into chaos. Several board members resigned. A petition circulated demanding that the entire governing structure be dissolved and rebuilt from scratch. Last I heard, their summer wellness program had been canceled. Turns out it's hard to run a lakeside yoga class when the lake doesn't want you anymore. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I went home, locked the gate, sat on the edge of the dock, and watched the water. Still. Quiet. Mine. 6 months later, the dock was quiet again. Not the tense kind of quiet I'd gotten used to. No protesters, no construction noise, no HOA volunteers pretending to meditate while filming for evidence. This was the real kind. The kind of quiet that let you hear birds kicking off from the reeds and the water tapping gently against the hull of a boat that had nowhere better to be. I was standing barefoot on the edge of the pier, a mug of coffee in one hand and a fishing rod in the other. The sun was just starting to break across the lake and everything smelled like pine and morning dew. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a man guarding his territory. I just felt like a man at peace. The property had changed, of course. No more collaborations with the HOA. No more free access zones. The north side of the lake had been fully fenced and landscaped. I even planted a few dogwoods near the old yoga clearing. One of them already bloomed with soft white petals like little paper stars. But I hadn't just closed off the space. I'd reimagined it. In early spring, I launched a Keller Lake Outdoor Club, a fully private, contract-based recreational program open to small groups by application. Kids could still learn to paddleboard here. Families could still fish and rent cabins, but this time it was done on my terms. Respect, rules, and signed waivers. Funny enough, some of the same parents who once called me a nature hoarder now applied to enroll their kids in the weekend program. I didn't hold a grudge, at least not against most of them. Karen's name never came up, and I doubted I'd see it on any applications anytime soon. Peter came by often. He'd become something like a local legend after the trial. People quoted his testimony like scripture in HOA meetings across 3 counties. One afternoon, he and I sat under the pavilion with a couple of beers, watching a group of kids learn how to cast from the bank. "You think they'll ever stop trying to take this place from you?" he asked. I shrugged. People always want what they didn't earn. But I'm not afraid of a fight anymore. Peter smiled, pulled something from his pocket, and handed it to me. A small carved sign, hand-burned lettering, rustic edges. Private doesn't mean selfish. It means stewardship. I mounted it on the dock the next day. Later that summer, I hosted a lakeside festival for the 4th of July. Music, food trucks, fireworks over the water. No HOA logos, no clipboard volunteers. Just neighbors who respected the rules and knew whose lake they were standing next to. As night fell, a kid from one of the new rental families came running up, barefoot, holding a paper plate with a half-eaten s'more. "Is this your lake?" he asked, chocolate on his chin. "Yeah," I said. "I guess it is." He looked out across the water, then back at me. "Cool. Thanks for letting us be here." And just like that, the world made sense again.